You think bandits wear masks? In this town, the bandit wears the sheriff's star, polished so bright it reflects whatever lie you need to believe. He rode in just after noon, when the sun sat high enough to make everything look honest. The road was smooth, the fences straight, the buildings freshly painted in calm, friendly colors. The town looked like a promise kept. Flowers hung from porch rails, windows were clean, not a single board was loose or broken. It felt less like a place that had grown over time, and more like something arranged carefully, piece by piece, for an audience. He slowed his horse, eyes scanning the street. People were out, but not lingering. A man swept the same patch of dirt again and again. A woman laughed a second too late at something her companion said. Children played near the well, but their voices stayed low, as if they had been taught that joy should never echo. The sheriff stepped out of his office as if on cue. He was tall, neat, and calm in the way men get when they believe the world is working exactly as it should. His badge caught the light, sending a sharp glint across the street. He smiled easily and walked forward with his hand already extended. "Welcome to our town," the sheriff said. His voice was warm, practiced. "We don't get many strangers." The rider dismounted and returned the handshake. The sheriff's grip was firm but friendly, the kind meant to reassure. "Just passing through," the rider said. "Well," the sheriff replied, still smiling, "we like to keep things peaceful for folks who pass through. Orderly, predictable. Orderly." The word settled in the rider's mind like dust that refused to blow away. He nodded and led his horse toward the stable, feeling eyes on his back. Not curious eyes, measuring ones. As he walked the main street, everything looked right. Too right. No arguments. No raised voices. No signs of struggle or strain. Even the air felt still, as if the town itself was holding its breath. He passed a general store where a bell rang sharply when the door opened. The clerk greeted him with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Afternoon," the clerk said quickly. "What can I get you?" The rider ordered supplies. The clerk moved fast, avoiding eye contact, hands trembling just enough to notice. When the rider offered a friendly comment about the fine weather, the clerk laughed, loud and hollow, then glanced toward the window as if checking for approval. Outside, the sheriff stood across the street talking with two men. They weren't listening. They were watching. The rider told himself he was imagining it. Every town has its habits. Every place has its own way of doing things. Still, something pressed against his thoughts. A quiet unease he couldn't name. He'd seen towns like this before. Places that smiled because they had learned it was safer than frowning. At the boarding house, the owner welcomed him with rehearsed enthusiasm. "Best room in town," she said, setting the key on the counter. "Quiet nights. Nothing ever goes wrong here." Nothing ever goes wrong. That was what people said when they had learned not to notice. As evening settled, lanterns lit the street in neat, even rows. Families went indoors at the same time, doors closing one after another until the town felt empty. The rider stood by his window, watching shadows stretch long and thin. Somewhere nearby, boots moved across wooden boards, slow, unhurried steps that didn't bother to hide. He sat on the edge of the bed and listened. The steps paused, then continued. No knock, no voice, just a reminder. This place wasn't protected by walls or guns. It was protected by agreement, by people deciding day after day that obedience was easier than questions. The rider lay back and stared at the ceiling. He told himself he would be gone by morning, that whatever held this town so tight was none of his concern. Yet even as he closed his eyes, he knew the truth had already taken hold. A town this clean didn't stay that way by accident. Morning came without noise, no carts rolling, no voices calling out. Just the soft creak of wood as the boarding house settled into the day. The rider woke early, dressed, and stepped outside expecting to hear a town starting its work. Instead, He found silence stretched tight across the street. People were there, moving about, but everything felt muted. Doors opened and closed quickly. Conversations ended the moment he drew near. Faces turned away too fast to seem natural. It was not the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of caution. He walked toward the general store. A man passed him on the boardwalk, nodded once, then looked straight ahead, as if afraid his eyes might betray him. The rider caught a glimpse of something in that man's face. Tension, sharp and practiced, like someone used to listening for footsteps behind him. Inside the store, the clerk from yesterday stood restocking shelves that were already full. His movements were stiff, careful. When the rider greeted him, the clerk startled, nearly dropping a box. "Didn't hear you come in," the clerk said, forcing a smile. "Town's quiet," the rider replied. The clerk hesitated, then nodded. "We like it that way." There it was again, that pause, that look toward the door. The rider followed the glance. Through the window, the sheriff stood across the street, talking with another man. The conversation looked friendly. Both were smiling. Still, the clerk's shoulders remained tight. The rider paid and stepped back outside. As he walked, he noticed the pattern forming. People moved with purpose, but no freedom. They stayed close to buildings. They avoided the center of the street. A woman pulled her child closer when he passed, not out of fear of him, but out of habit. He stopped near the well. The children from the day before were there again, playing a quiet game. No shouting, no running. Just murmured rules and careful laughter. One boy glanced up at the rider, eyes wide, then quickly looked away. Another child whispered something, and they all shifted farther from him. He crouched slightly and spoke gently. "You all live here?" No one answered. A girl nodded once, barely. Then a voice called from a nearby porch, "Come inside, now!" The children scattered instantly, buckets abandoned, game forgotten. The rider straightened and turned. An older woman stood rigid in her doorway, her face pale. She didn't look at him. She watched the empty street, as if waiting for something else to appear. That was when he felt it clearly. Not danger. Not yet. Fear. Worn thin from long use. He walked on, letting his boots sound against the boards. No one asked where he was headed. No one offered help or greeting. It was as if the town had decided together to pretend he was already gone. Near the sheriff's office, two men stood talking. Their voices dropped as the rider approached. One of them cleared his throat. "Nice weather," the man said, too quickly. "Sure is," the rider replied. The men nodded and fell silent. When the rider moved past them, he heard one whisper. "He doesn't know." The words stayed with him. By midday, he sat at a small table outside the cafe. The owner served him without a word, eyes fixed on the tabletop. When he tried to thank her, she flinched, then forced herself to nod. He watched the town while he ate. Everyone was careful. Everyone was watching someone else. And above it all was the sheriff, moving calmly from place to place, greeting people by name, resting a hand on a shoulder here, exchanging a quiet word there. Wherever he went, people relaxed just enough to breathe. That was the truth of it. They weren't afraid all the time. They were afraid of what happened when things stopped being calm. The rider leaned back and exhaled slowly. He had seen fear before, loud and desperate. This was different. This fear was trained, polished. It lived behind smiles and manners. As he stood to leave, the cafe owner finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Best not stay long," she said, still not looking at him. He met her eyes. "Why?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She shook her head once, small and sharp. "Just best not." The rider stepped back onto the street. The sun was bright. The town looked perfect, and now he understood why. Nothing was wrong here because no one was allowed to notice when it was. By late afternoon, the town felt smaller. Not in distance, but in options. The rider sensed it as he walked. like walls closing in without ever moving. He had planned to leave before sunset. That plan faded the moment the sheriff stepped into his path. The sheriff approached with the same calm smile, the same easy pace. He tipped his hat slightly, friendly as ever. "Mind if we talk?" he asked, already guiding the rider toward the cafe. Inside, the room was nearly empty. A few locals sat far apart, heads down, pretending not to listen. The sheriff chose a table near the window, where the light caught his badge just right. "Coffee?" the sheriff asked. The rider shook his head. "I'm leaving." The sheriff chuckled softly, as if hearing a harmless joke. "Most folks say that at first." He leaned back, folding his hands. "We have a simple way of doing things here. Keeps everyone comfortable. Safe." He paused, letting the words settle. "Travelers contribute a small fee, just for the time they're with us." The rider didn't answer right away. He watched the sheriff's face. No threat, no anger, just patience. "A fee for what?" the rider asked. "For protection," the sheriff replied smoothly. "From misunderstandings, from trouble." The rider felt a tightness in his chest. The word protection echoed in his mind, pulling something old to the surface. Years ago, another town, another man with a calm voice, another promise that if everyone just cooperated, nothing bad would happen. Back then, he had paid. He had looked away. He had told himself it wasn't his fight. The memory came without warning. A dusty street. A friend who spoke up once, just once. The silence afterward. The way everyone pretended it was unavoidable. The rider's jaw tightened. "I won't pay," he said. The sound of it seemed to drain the room. A cup rattled slightly on a nearby table. Someone shifted in their chair. The sheriff blinked once. The smile stayed, but something behind it hardened. "I'd think carefully," he said. "This town runs on cooperation." "So I've seen," the rider replied. The sheriff leaned forward, lowering his voice. "People here depend on order. They don't like disruptions. Someone refusing to follow the rules can make them nervous." "That sounds like their problem," the rider said, then paused. "Or yours." The sheriff studied him, really studied him now. "You know," he said quietly, "most men who pass through don't want trouble. They want a meal, a bed, and to be on their way. Paying a small fee is easier than standing on principle." The rider felt the weight of the choice pressing down on him. He could pay. He could leave. He could tell himself again that it wasn't his place. But the memory returned, sharper this time. The look in his friend's eyes. The regret that never quite faded. "No," he said. The sheriff straightened. The warmth vanished from his voice, replaced by something colder, though still polite. "That's unfortunate." He stood and adjusted his coat. "You're free to reconsider. We're reasonable people." As he turned to leave, he added softly, "The town doesn't take kindly to stubbornness." The sheriff walked out. Conversation did not resume. No one looked at the rider. It was as if he had already crossed some invisible line. Outside, the sun dipped lower. The rider stepped into the street and felt the change immediately. Doors closed more firmly. A shopkeeper flipped a sign to closed, though daylight remained. People avoided his gaze entirely now. He walked past the well. Empty. Past the stable. Closed. Even the boarding house door was shut tight. That was the twist he hadn't expected. Not anger. Not confrontation. Just withdrawal. The town was turning its back on him. One quiet decision at a time. He stood there alone in the open and realized the sheriff didn't need force. He had something stronger. Fear shared by many was more powerful than any order given aloud. The rider exhaled slowly. He could still leave. Nothing stopped him but his own feet. But if he did, the memory would follow him again. Another town. Another silence he accepted. He squared his shoulders and headed back toward his room. Whatever came next, The choice had already been made. Night settled in without ceremony. No music drifted from open windows. No laughter carried through the street. Lamps went dark one by one until only a few steady lights remained, spaced carefully, like markers. The rider sat inside his room at the boarding house, chair tipped back against the door, table pressed tight beneath the handle. It was not a fortress. It was a message. He was staying. He had expected shouting, demands, maybe a knock from the sheriff. None came. Instead, there was the slow pressure of absence. No footsteps passed his door. No voices rose outside. The town did not rush him. It waited. Hours passed. He listened to the building settle, to the faint sounds of movement elsewhere. A floorboard creaked in a neighboring room, then went still. Someone coughed and quickly stifled it. Life continued, just not with him in it. Near midnight, a soft knock came at the door. Not loud, not forceful, careful. He stood but did not answer. A familiar voice spoke through the wood, calm and even. "You don't need to make this harder than it has to be." The sheriff. "We can still fix this," the sheriff said. "You pay. You leave in the morning. No harm done." The rider leaned his shoulder against the door. "You already did harm," he said. A pause, then a quiet sigh. "That's one way to see it," the sheriff replied. "Another way is that we keep people safe here. Order requires sacrifice." "From everyone but you?" the rider asked. The sheriff didn't answer right away. When he did, his tone was polite, almost kind. "Sleep on it." The footsteps moved away. Morning light crept in through the window. The rider rose stiff and alert. He peered outside. The street was empty again, but something had changed. A crate sat near the boarding house steps, empty. A sign nailed crookedly to the post read, "Closed." He tried the door. It opened, but no one stood behind the counter. The place felt abandoned, stripped of warmth. He stepped outside. The sound of his boots echoed louder than it should have. As he walked, he realized the town was no longer avoiding him. It was watching him openly now. Faces appeared behind curtains. People stood in doorways, arms crossed, expressions tight. No one spoke. No one stepped forward. He went to the stable. The owner stood nearby, blocking the entrance. "You need to leave," the man said, voice shaking. "I'm trying to," the rider replied. "I need my horse." The man glanced down the street. "Not until this is settled." That was when the truth landed fully. The town had chosen. Not him. Not justice. Stability. He returned to the boarding house and closed himself in again. He dragged furniture into place, not because it would stop anyone, but because it marked his line. The air inside felt heavy. Time slowed. By afternoon, the pressure grew. Someone knocked again. This time it wasn't the sheriff. "Please," a woman's voice said. "Just do what he asks." The rider stayed silent. "My family depends on this place," she continued. "You're putting us all at risk." Her words cut deeper than any threat. He imagined her face, the fear behind the request. He wondered how many times she had spoken those same words to herself. "I won't be the reason," he said quietly. A murmur rose outside. More voices, not loud, not angry, just enough to be heard. The town had gathered. He caught fragments through the wall. "He won't bend. Why can't he just pay? He's going to bring trouble." The sheriff's voice cut through them all, smooth and steady. Everyone remained calm. The rider sat on the bed, hands resting on his knees. He felt the weight of every eye outside. The town didn't need to break in. It only needed to wait until hunger, doubt, or guilt did the work for them. As evening fell again, someone threw a stone. It hit the wall, not the window. A warning, then another, still careful. The rider closed his eyes. This was the siege, not of wood and walls, but of will. The town had become the sheriff's tool, and he had become their excuse. He stayed where he was, breathing slow, holding his ground. Outside, the people waited, afraid of him and afraid for themselves, unsure which fear would win. And for the first time since he arrived, the town no longer looked perfect at all. It began with a sound no one expected. Not a shout, not a command. A door opening. The rider heard it from inside the boarding house, the slow creak of hinges cutting through the morning quiet. He rose from the chair he had slept in and looked out through the narrow window. Across the street, the cafe door stood open. The owner stepped outside, hands shaking, eyes fixed forward. She didn't look at the sheriff. She set a loaf of bread on the table outside and stepped back. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then another door opened. The general store. The clerk emerged, carrying a small sack, and placed it beside the bread. He swallowed hard and stayed where he was. The street stirred. Curtains moved. A man from the stable walked out, empty-handed but standing tall enough to be seen. A woman joined him. Then another. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. The sheriff stepped into view, his expression calm but strained at the edges. "This isn't necessary," he said evenly. "Everyone go back inside." No one moved. The rider opened the boarding house door and stepped out slowly. Every eye turned to him. He expected anger, blame. Instead, he saw something else. Relief mixed with fear, like people finally admitting they were tired. The sheriff faced him, voice still polite. "You've made your point. You can leave now." The rider shook his head. That was never the point. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You're confusing people," he said. "They depend on order." "They depend on quiet," the rider replied. "That's not the same thing." The cafe owner spoke then, barely louder than the wind. "We've paid long enough." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "We told ourselves it was normal, that it was safer, but it never felt safe." Others found their voices, hesitant at first, then steadier. "He said it was for protection. He said we'd lose everything if we didn't listen. I'm tired of being afraid of calm words." The sheriff turned slowly, scanning the faces he thought he owned. For the first time, his smile failed him. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Without structure, things fall apart." "Maybe," the rider said. "But at least the choice will be ours." The silence that followed felt different than before. It wasn't tight. It wasn't trained. It was honest. The sheriff stepped back. Just one step. It was small, but everyone saw it. He looked at the rider one last time. "You'll regret this," he said, not as a promise, but as a hope. Then he turned and walked away, his badge dull in the daylight. No one followed him. The town didn't celebrate. There were no cheers, no sudden joy. People stood where they were, unsure what came next. Fear doesn't leave all at once. It loosens its grip slowly. The rider retrieved his horse from the stable without a word. The owner nodded once, eyes wet, and stepped aside. As the rider mounted up, the cafe owner approached him. "You didn't have to stay," she said. He met her gaze. "I know." She hesitated. "Will you come back?" He looked down the street, at the doors now open, at people talking quietly without glancing over their shoulders. "This town doesn't need me anymore," he said. As he rode out, the town behind him felt changed. Not fixed, not healed, but awake. The road stretched ahead, familiar and uncertain. The rider didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and lighter. Somewhere behind him, people were making choices for the first time in a long while. Some would be hard, some would be wrong, but they would be theirs. He didn't look back. Because some towns don't need saving. They just need someone willing to stand still long enough for the fear to break.